We're back with Season 6, Episode 5, Gauntlet of Fire. This is the episode in which Spike and Twilight and Rarity head up to down to the Dragonlands in order to vie for the right to become the next Dragon Lord. We get some good world building about dragons, some interesting insight into dragon culture, and most importantly of all, we introduce a new character, Ember. And that's it. We're done. Tune in next time. Two interesting things about the hook, the cold open. First, Rarity and Spike are gathering together to not screw up. The two of them there are able to do what Rarity herself is not able to do. And I know, duh, but since that is arguably the main point of the entire episode, it's nice to see it. They've done this before in MLP, where they actually show the theme, the Aesop, the lesson, the point of the episode right in the intro. And they do it here too. Rarity flat out says, if not for Spike, she would have actually caused all sorts of issues and ended up getting the bats to startle, like happened last time and like ends up incidentally happening this time. It is, of course, amusing that Rarity is probably the actual bodyguard, as Raskor points out. And I know that because you can tell this is a subtle point, I think. Not super subtle, just subtle. But it's really cool how you can actually tell how much Rarity cares about Spike here. Why? Well, when she rushes back with Spike to Twilight and the princesses, she is filthy. She has mud in her mane, for God's sakes. Rarity does. It's a really nice tiny touch, and it's not even necessary, but it's good to kind of showcase how much she cares and how far she's gone with regards to that particular thing. Just nice little bit there. I am willing to go ahead and give that a continuity counter, because that's kind of awesome. Don't worry, we got another one coming up soon. So, the glow itches. I was actually thinking about that for a bit, if it was an unintentional thing, but frankly, making your subjects itch until they answer your command is actually a pretty good way to ensure their obedience. Oh, sure, you could do other horrible, horrific things, but, I mean, first of all, this is MLP, and second of all, itching would probably be more effective long-term, if you think about it, because itching just gets bad, and then worse, and then worse. And then worse. Oh god, oh god, oh god, make it stop, make it stop. I'm sure some of you know what that feels like. I will point to my own personal experience with poison oak to relate to that one. Because I had a massive outbreak of poison oak. I had to lay on the living room on a towel, or a sheet level of poison oak. I had poison oak in my mouth. It was horrific. So yeah, I think the itching is a plenty effective way of ensuring obedience. Another tiny little thing here. Yeah, exactly. It's just, okay, I guess I'm just gonna die then. Oh god, I wanted to. What's poison oak? Well, you've probably heard of poison ivy. Poison oak is the other relative to poison ivy. And yeah, the light ensures everyone knows it too. There's no avoiding it. There's no like, oh, whoops. I wonder which dragon the princesses encountered in their previous times that glowed that enabled them to know how this thing works. Just minor little tidbit. Maybe a visitor? Something like that? We do know other nations tend to send delegates to Equestria, even other non-pony nations, so food for thought. Either way. Yeah, it could have been Torch for, before he was Dragon Lord, because Torch has been Dragon Lord for a while, but so Twilight wants to come with, and why wouldn't she? What I like about this is it's the easiest thing to understand why she would be so invested in coming along. After all, she wants to go for effectively the exact same reason we want her to go. We want the info on an unknown. We want that world building and the knowledge and information and research and yada 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 yada, so she's super excited. And, I mean, honestly, who wouldn't want to learn something? I guess I say that personally. I'm sure there are people out there who wouldn't care, but I personally would totally want to learn about something that no one else has ever learned about, or at least we only know distant things about, right? As I've said before, and as I'll be saying later today, because I'll be playing Assassin's Creed Syndicate in about an hour or two here, I would love to be able to actually go back to the past and learn what really happened in many, 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 many cases of real history, just to use an example of that. So Garble's there. He still sucks. Really, really little touches with the animation. They actually animated the ponies' mouths inside the costumes in several scenes, which is just... Speaking as someone who's been working on animation as recently as about an hour ago, no, really, I tend to appreciate and notice those little touches, and MLP has just phenomenal animation, so I wanted to point that out really quick. I know, poor Twilight, Mother Miracet. So, this then leads to Garble. Garble still sucks. I'll talk more about Garble in a minute, but this immediately leads into Torch, who is absolutely huge. Now, we've actually seen large dragons before, but if you're paying attention, percentage-wise, large dragons are the uncommon ones. In fact, we've only encountered 3 large dragons, counting Torch, to date. Every other dragon has been far smaller. I mean, still large creatures compared to ponies and Spike, but nowhere near on the scale of being able to sit on a freaking mountain. And yeah, I'm thinking, and this is pure speculation, but I'm thinking it's how dragons tend to be. They get bigger the older they are. It's the alligator thing. And so he is probably very, very old. This would also explain why we've only seen literally 3 of these elder dragons. By the way, the previous 2 might be the same one because they share this exact same art style, so it's entirely possible we've only ever seen 2 of these extremely large, extremely old dragons. Now, I want to say a couple things about Torch really quick. First of all, while he is portrayed as what I like to call the humorous dictator, where the joke is there, ha ha ha, agree with me. Like, I've seen that in so much of fiction, even live action, in addition to animated. A good example of that would be Thor 3, Thor Ragnarok, with the guy whose name I can't think of, played by Jeff Goldblum. You know, humorous dictator. It's an archetype. I've seen it quite a few times. He is portrayed as that, but if you actually sit back and think about it, he seems to be a pretty legit reader. Here's the stuff I came up with right off the top of my head. First of all, he's willing to abdicate power, which by itself says something, especially for someone who probably doesn't have a maximum deadline on his age. He could just keep ruling if he wanted to. Point number 2, he does fairly allow Spike to leave. Number 3, and this is skipping ahead, he's okay with the results at the end. And number 4, and this is the really big one, Equestria has been left alone for generations, even though the dragons have the motive, the resources, and the power to just walk in if they wanted to. Now, Equestria may actually be able to resist that. We've seen this in alternate timelines, like, say, when King Sombra attacked, we saw that Equestria was able to mobilize. But we know Equestria has not mobilized to the point where they don't even have a regular military, something I've brought up multiple times, and this is one of those reasons why. The fact that Torch has held the reins back enough to ensure that they don't just go and crush Equestria, or at least try to crush Equestria. Food for thought. This is especially relevant because even though most of the dragons we see are basically teenagers, equivalent, or, college jocks would actually be probably a better example than teenagers. So college jocks, you'll notice that all of them have plans regarding the ponies. Oh, no, excuse me, all except one had plans regarding the ponies. And I get the really strong impression that the desire to go after Equestria is not exactly an uncommon one. Now, this then leads to another fascinating thing about dragon culture. They do what many, many cultures have done in real life and in fiction. They decide that might leads to leadership prowess. Now, this is stupid. It's so stupid, I don't even need to explain why it's stupid. We can understand its roots make perfect sense. When you are 40, 20, 8 people who are literally roaming around trying to find a cave or to get enough hide in order to make a tarp to live under, the person who's really good at fighting and surviving probably should be making the calls. But the problem is that era is so far back on the tech tree that we grow out of that almost immediately. Right about the point we get to farming, which is way back, is when that mentality kind of goes out the window as far as reasonability. This very episode actually goes out of its way to showcase how how much that format is incorrect, how much it's something that shouldn't and doesn't work. This is also why so many real-life historical figures who are great warrior kings have one of two things that, three things that tend to happen to them. Thing number one, they fail hard. This is pretty common. Thing number two, they tend to have a really wise, good leader who is their queen, or their chancellor, or someone else who's actually running the country or nation or tribe or whatever. And then thing number three, and this is the really rare exception. There's probably maybe a handful of these in real-life history. Thing number three is when they happen to be a good warrior and a good leader. Those are the dangerous ones. You watch for them. I bring all this up, though, because... Yeah, Alexander the Great. I bring all this up because this is... it makes so much sense that dragons would follow this kind of thing, because dragon culture is so non-developed, which, again, makes sense given their predilection towards solo mentality. I want you to imagine... Here, just run through a thought exercise with me. I want you to imagine human beings, except we are way more physically powerful than we are, right? Imagine that we're Tauren, is actually an example I like to use, because this is part of Tauren history over in Warcraft. Imagine we are big, strong, durable, can withstand just about all the elements, and can eat just about whatever, and are complete apex predators. You know, we're xenomorphs walking around. If that was true, if that was the kind of species that we were, yeah, can bathe in lava, if that was the kind of species we were, there's a pretty good chance that we wouldn't have, we might still to this day not be at the point of civilization, because we wouldn't need it. The whole reason, if you follow the tech tree, again, to go to the earlier reference, if you follow the tech tree, it was all because of necessity. It was all something that we did because we had to. Because two people could accomplish so much more than one could, and people would literally die unless they unified. Tribal mentality was required to survive, which led to more people getting more involved with more people, getting more involved with more people, until finally we just kind of kept developing and developing and developing. Yeah, our culture is far closer to pony culture. And we don't even have their advantages, because they're at the point of mastery of their environment. We're still working on trying to not destroy ours. Okay. Dragons are dragons. So it makes perfect sense that they are, more or less literally, still stuck in the Stone Age. They have laws and communicate and interact with each other, but they are still effectively solo creatures who only really interact with each other when they have to, or for fun. They don't have an actual civilization at all. They have a culture, but they don't have a civilization, because their culture developed differently because they're frickin' dragons. You see the difference? So it makes perfect sense that they would still follow this backwards, incorrect mentality. Now, the funny thing is, if... It's true, okay? If our... Let's go back to real-life humans. If real-life humans were dragons, and there was no other sentient sapient species on planet Earth, we'd probably... There's a chance we would never develop civilization. We would never need to. And there would never be anything pushing us to. You'll notice in this very episode, Ember is smart for the dragons, but even she has to be introduced to the idea from an external source. If not for the inference, if not for the introduction of the concept from an external source, it would have never even occurred to her. Like, you see the mentality here? This is all fascinating, so forgive me for going off on this topic. Now, where was I going with that? So I was talking about... Oh, yeah. So, now the dragons do have an advantage that theoretical human dragons wouldn't have. They have a foreign sentient sapient power. They actually have several sentient sapient other species throughout their planet, which they can interact with, which can lead to exchange of ideas, exchange of resources, exchange of services, exchange of goods, and that can lead to eventual development, which is going to happen, and the first few steps have happened in this very episode. It is interesting how long it took, but as I've pointed out before, even Equestria has only relatively recently, within the last 3 generations, really started to cohese. So, it does make a degree of sense. I think the dragons in general would probably get along pretty well with the axe. Mostly because they would keep doing this. My take on it. So, next thing I wanted to talk about. It's a contest for the big and the strong. Now, I already mentioned my thoughts on might equaling leadership capacity. But in this case, what we see is two funny little things. First of all, the contest is specifically designed to be something that Torch himself could accomplish. Which, okay, there's a degree of logic to that. He wants someone, to his successor, to be someone who is his equivalent. And this is the only metric he knows, for the reasons we already discussed, so okay, I'm with that. But the second thing I find interesting is that this is an any percent run. What I mean by that, let me discuss this briefly on the off chance some of you aren't aware with speedrunning categories. So speedrunning is fun. I love speedrunning. It's when you play a game and you jot down your time and you try to improve your time. It's a competitive slash first improvement thing, right? But categories are important because if you're running 100% and I'm running any percent, we are effectively in completely separate classes. We are not competing with each other because we have nothing to do with each other. Not really. We could share and swap ideas and stories and get some concepts across, but for the most part, we are not on the same leaderboard, right? It's the same reason why golf, people who are playing golf for a certain, on this course, do not directly compare their score to people who are playing golf on this other course. Now, any percent in this context means anything goes. That is actually what that terminology requires. You can do whatever as long as you get to that goal line. The only thing that matters is that goal line. Hi, Darth Mordoro. If you manage to get to that goal line, you win. Now, this can lead to some shenanigans, and often subcategories will bleed off of any percent, but I don't want to get into that. The point being here is that you can cheat or lie or deceit or kill or do whatever you have to do. All that matters is who gets that scepter and who gets to the goal line. Now, that's interesting to me because A, it says a little bit about Torch as a mentality, but B, there's a positive side to that as well. Because on the one hand, Garble can cheat and manipulate his way through, but on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with two dragons teaming up to get the scepter. Because it's any percent, anything goes. So what they do is fully legal as they're going through this one, because that's what's allowed, right? Even passing the scepter off to someone else is allowed, because any percent. I just found that fascinating. And yeah, the thought never occurs to most of them. Hell, even her, the thought didn't really occur to her until it was naturally introduced to her. But I'm getting off topic. By the way, I love the seaweed costume. So I like how he helps Ember, and that was the right choice. And then he helps Garble, and that was the wrong choice. This is something I've talked about before, and I'm only going to mention briefly here because it's the cost of kindness. I've talked about this a lot. The idea that you have to accept that when you reach out to help someone else, you are doing so knowing that you are accepting the cost that may come with that. The fact that they may hurt you or betray you or whatever. That's actually a real life problem. So Spike does actually get hurt for helping Garble. It's just it ends up working out because he also bothered to help Ember. And now that he has assisted her by pulling her out when she was drowning, now she understands what that assistance is worth. She stands up for him, then he stands up for her. And the two of them kind of, again, the idea is naturally introduced to her to help someone else. At no point does Spike say, hey, we should work together. I'm saying this wrong. He does say we should work together, but he says that after, simply by doing, she is introduced to the idea. I just want to really emphasize that because it's really important. So this leads to... they help each other. She's smart enough to recognize the benefits of partnership. Spike is well versed in the benefits of partnership. And there's a really quick Aesop that just kind of jumps in really quick. It's for one line. Okay, but we're not going to make necklaces or pick flowers or do whatever it is that friends do. That is a surprisingly important Aesop that more people need to learn, in my opinion. What is that Aesop? That friendship is not just one thing. That there's not one type of friendship. Many people can be friends with each other in many different ways, and it can express itself in many different ways. really minor thing. But it just kind of slides itself under the rug there, and then they move on. Speaking of the fact that Twilight and Rarity don't actually help, they just cheer. The only time they actually go to help is when Spike was in actual danger. And the only reason they don't help is because Ember got there first. That's a continuity counter right there. If you remember, we've already had moments in the past where... I need to update the continuity counter. Where we have shown that Spike wants to be able to do it himself. That the whole point is that he is endeavoring to try and accomplish this by himself. And he's actually emphasized this point repeatedly to Twilight in specific. And so the fact that they hold back, and the fact that they just cheer him on and let him deal with it unless things get really bad, which it only is once, is extremely in character and shows that they remember that lesson from before. So credit to continuity there. Now, what's funny is Raskor says, you know, imagine if a foreign dignitary helped a president to become the president. Well, I hate to disagree with you on that, Raskor, but in this exact case, remember what I said, this isn't any percent. Who cares if someone else helps them? No, now this is just my take on it because they don't actually explain this, but this is most likely why it is. You can interpret it however you want. That's what I'm trying to say. My interpretation is that they are trying to, you know, allow him to have his moment. You can interpret it differently, and that's cool. And then we'll fight to the death, and then we'll kill each other, and then we'll destroy the world. Now, then we have the tree outfit. So we have a brief montage where Garble so Ember and Spike are doing pretty well because they're working together, and Garble is failing by virtue of being alone. Now, there's an interesting point here. Garble probably would have won under other circumstances. Debatably, I know this is something that we could argue because there's a lot of convening factors here. But it's interesting to note that Garble is so far behind them that not only do Ember and Spike have a chance to have a whole conversation, and then Spike gets lost in the caves, and then manages to find his way to the thing, and then Garble catches up. But Ember herself is also similarly having problems actually finding the thing. It's a hell of a lead is what I'm trying to say. And it helps to show what they then immediately say, where they show and then tell, something they do all the time here. Then they have the stalactite outfits. They're so cute! And they got... The animations as the stalactite mounts are just kind of doing this. It's beautiful. Love it. Yeah, so the episode tells what it already showed, where he helps Rarity directly. And this then leads to Ember being delightfully, adorably awkward. Ugh, please don't make me talk about my feelings. Love it. This then leads to Garble, who is like, dragons don't do helping. And we've already talked about that. But he says it flat out on the off chance that it hasn't been made clear by this point. So then they win. Woo! Any percent. Now, it is implied earlier that there is a literal magical power inherent to being a Dragon Lord. We do see the call, after all. But that could have just been one spell, the one magical ability of the Dragon Lord. It's up to you, of course, as to whether or not you think there is a literal magical power to being the Dragon Lord or not. I think there is, but there could not be, because after all, it could just be a political thing. It could just be the nature of their culture. You have to obey the Dragon Lord for whatever reason. But I bring this up because Garble, despite being Garble, someone who has never learned his lesson and is a punk idiot teenager who doesn't even get the sarcasm of people around him, to name just one example, nevertheless follows his order to the letter, flies home and hugs every dragon on his way without telling them why. That's one of the reasons why I think that there's some actual magical power behind the command. This is again implied earlier when he says, "Be sad!" You know, that whole thing. Anyways. And of course she tries to do that and it doesn't do it anyways. You get the point. So, I have talked quite a bit about exactly how idyllic, how better the MLP world is than the real world. One of the examples I like to use over in Pokemon is that you can let a 10-year-old roam out in the world and it's fine. You know, it's one of the examples of how much better that world is in real life. Allow me to share one of my favorite little tidbits of how much better Equestria is than in real life. Because in Equestria, there is a succession crisis during which two people equally manage to take the throne from the previous holder, and in so doing become friends, and one of them willingly abdicates to the other. I want to really emphasize that. Maybe it's just because I'm a historical/political/war geek, but that's insanity. I'm not sure there is a historical example of that happening in real life. What usually happens is two people claim power, and then time passes, and then one of them kills the other. I'm skipping some details in the middle, but that's generally how that works. In some cases, one kills the other immediately. In some cases, one was always planning to kill the other. In some cases, they kill each other. In some cases, it takes years for that friendship to break apart, and then one of them claims power from the other. But the idea of one person taking power and then willingly handing it to the other is insanity, and very cool. And why this world is better. It's why MLP is better than real life. Exhibit B. I mean, they got his back, S.A. Ross. So here's a question. I actually saw a few people who debated this in the past. Do you think Torch is exactly as presented, aka or do you think Torch was secretly trying to push his daughter to becoming Dragon Lord by virtue of, you know, no, you shouldn't do this? I've seen this debated, and I'm not sure what I think of it personally. Again, there are hints that Torch is not exactly stupid and far better than the typical, you know, humorous dictator, as I mentioned earlier. It is worth noting, and I already mentioned this earlier, he puts up maybe one minor objection to Ember taking power. And then he's like, okay. That's just, you got it, cool. Yeah, he does keep emphasizing the big and strong thing, and it is clearly what pushes her buttons, and... Yeah, no, I lean towards the latter as well, along with most of you, apparently. It feels weird, I'm looking so far apart here. But it's okay, not Torch. Ember is friends with Spike now, and will be regularly corresponding with Twilight. And if you're zooming the camera out, something extremely important has happened in this episode. We fleshed out the dragons, we've introduced a new character, but most importantly of all, we've secured the southeastern flank. This is, I believe, the third? I think this is the third non-pony race that has been reached out to in the last several seasons, and now has been secured as effectively an ally. Yeah, I think it is because, yeah, that's the Griffins. They reached out to the Griffins, that worked out well, and we'll see a follow-through on that. And then this season, reached out to the Axe, that worked out well. That'll also happen in the future. But now we've reached out to the Dragons, who are, and this is, you notice how the escalation is still happening, because the Axe and the Griffins are certainly, you know, a thing, but they're not dragons. But the Dragons, with that secured, we're doing a lot better off now. And obviously, I'm thinking from a political and from a terrain historical perspective, but even from a personal perspective, you'll notice how the pattern that I talk about so much is continuing to propagate, simply by virtue of natural interactions, as I've said before, not some external power, but rather simply Spike being friendly with Ember, which has led to Ember being friendly with Twilight, which is going to lead to more friendships in the future, and you get the idea. Cool stuff. Very good episode. How do you rate this one? What do y'all think? I'm thinking blue, maybe puke. Well, I'm assuming the map I'm looking at right here is the updated one, because the Badlands are down there, the Dragon area is the southeast, which is why I referenced the southeast. Griffinstone is just straight east across the Celestial Sea. But if there's another map other than this one, I don't know about it off the top of my head. No, Mr. Red, absolutely not. Oh yeah, this is also a good Spike episode, which is rather unusual. How many other good episodes have we had? I mean, I'm sure we've had at least one. Right? Who wrote this episode? Oh, for God's sakes. Joanna Lewis and Christine Songko. I have no idea who those people are. Let's see if they're already on the list. Oh, they are. They did Castle Sweet Castle, Rarity Investigates, and the Fields and McCults. Is there anyone in the world? No, Lord Hermon. No. That's true. Inspiration Manifestation. That was a good one. As much as I really like this episode, I'm not sure it qualifies for purple territory. Because for me, it doesn't have that extra oomph to push it into purple. But I think this is absolutely a red. You know, continuity, character, world building, presentation, animation, just it's good stuff. I don't even really have any complaints about it. And yeah, this episode is also, like so many other episodes we've already covered, going to come up in a big way in the future, because this is laying down a very important brick in the future of this this country. Yeah, an establisher, that's a good way to put that. This is a very important establisher episode. Next, because I am in a little bit of a hurry, but I took my time with the episode. Next episode we're covering is Kingdom Hearts, apparently. Here we go. No Second Prances. That's going to be Season 6, Episode 6. No Second Prances. The best episode ever. So I'll be back in about 25 minutes.